Hi, this is John Acosta, and welcome to Video Production Fundamentals in Adobe Prelude and Premiere Pro. This course is designed as a step-by-step guide on how to produce video from a professional and creative standpoint so that you can begin creating video content for yourself, your business, or your future clients. If this is the first time you've ever attempted to create a video or work inside of Adobe Prelude or Premiere, I congratulate you on taking the first step. I've been in the production business for over 10 years, and I'll be the first to admit that this stuff can often be incredibly confusing, especially when you're just getting started. So throughout this course, it's my #1 priority to make sure that you walk away understanding the fundamentals of how video post-production really works from the ground up. I'll also promise to keep it lighthearted and easy to understand because, let's face it, talking about how to conform a 4K resolution file into a native 1080p sequence at 25 variable frames per second can be a little draining. So I'll make sure we keep things fun. In the next few lessons, we're going to hop into Adobe Prelude and start learning how to prepare and process our video content, while also learning what all those crazy words like transcoding, ingesting, and proxy files actually mean, and more importantly, why they should matter to you and all of your future video productions. So let's hop into our demo and get started making some video. All right, so here we are inside of Prelude CC, and our first step is going to be to create a brand new project. So we'll give it a click, select our desktop, and on the desktop I already have a Prelude to Premiere project folder created for us. So I'm going to go ahead and open this up. And I'm going to name this file Prelude to Premiere Project, and we'll just give it a 01 at the end. Then we'll just hit our Enter key, and voila! We have a brand new project. Looks great, right? So now, before we get into the nitty-gritty, I do want to explain and give you a couple of tips inside of our Prelude General section. And if you go up to Prelude CC, Preferences, and go to the General Options, you're able to come in here and make a few changes that are really going to save you a lot of headache in the future. Let me show you what I mean. Inside of this preference menu, we have the ability to make a lot of modifications, including the project cache file folder, and this one is just notorious for piling up after you've worked on multiple projects, and then you end up running out of space on your hard drive and you wonder why. Well, this will resolve it. This delete cache files older than 30 days is a great option to have on, because what this does is it takes your files that Prelude produces in the background to make your system faster, and it deletes them every single 30 days. Now you can change this number to anything you want, but for the sake of our project, we're just going to set this to 30 so we can make sure that those are deleted in 30 days. Now below this, we have the project cache file location, and by default, Adobe Prelude will save it in its very own folder inside of your Documents folder. So we can actually come in here by clicking Browse, and what I like to do is take those cache files and set them inside of our project folder, the one that we created a little earlier. Now, to keep things organized, I like to create a new folder. So if we come in down to our new folder option right here, just call this Cache Files, and boom, now we have ourselves a brand new folder. We'll hit Choose. And once we make this change, Prelude will ask us, hey, I've got some cache files that may or may not already exist, and what do you want me to do with this? And if we're doing this in the middle of a project, it's a good idea to use the Move option. But since we're only just starting, we're going to go ahead and hit Delete because it doesn't matter. And that'll delete all the old cache files that were hanging out in the Documents folder, and it's going to create new ones inside of this new folder in our Project folder. Moving forward, we have the Media tab. And this folder, just like the previous one, has all of our media cache files. And these can actually end up really bogging down your system. So it's always a good idea to come in here and modify them accordingly. Now, by default, again, we're going to have all of our media cache files going into Adobe's specific file structure. And we can always change this to make it match the originals when possible, or we can browse and put them wherever we'd like to on our system. And the same goes for the media cache database right below here. So just like the other ones, just like the other cache files, we can always change where the location is, and I highly advise to keep your stuff local. And the big benefit for this is, let's say your computer were to crash, God forbid, or you needed to move to another computer to continue working, well, having everything centralized and localized into one folder, including the cache files, is going to make that workflow much easier to move from one system to another and continue where you left off. Again, Prelude is going to ask us, hey, what about those old cache database files? We'll just select delete again because we just started. Okay, so next up is our memory tab, and this is an incredibly important tab that a lot of people don't take advantage of. And it essentially allows us to select how much memory or RAM we'd like to dedicate to a specific Adobe software. And in this case, we're seeing that the RAM reserved for this application is 2.5 gigs. Now, depending on your system, you can come in and change this to modify what works best for you. And my biggest tip for you here is you'll want to optimize the playback for performance, as we see here. Now, for the last option is the Creative Cloud tab. Now, this is basically where your Creative Cloud storage comes into play. Now, if you're using Prelude, chances are that you probably have a Creative Cloud account, and that account may or may not have a limited amount of reserves. So it's always important to come in here and just do a bit of an audit on how many cache files are being used up in your cloud resources. And if you ever want to clean them, we can come into this option and hit the clean button, which will wipe out those cache files. All right, so enough about cache. Let's go ahead and hit OK, and let's start talking about ingesting our footage. So first, let's go ahead and start by double-clicking on this ingest window. To get started, I'm going to go ahead and close all these tabs over here because we don't want to get ahead of ourselves, and there's a lot to talk about. So, patience. On the left, I have a list of hard drives that are connected to my computer. And what we're concerned with right now is the footage SD. I'd like to explain to you our mission together here. On this card, we have a client project. The client is a hair salon, and this hair salon is trying to put together an employee training video. We do see that there's two folders in here, one named the EOS Digital and one named the R3D Redcam. And in this footage, we'll see quite a few different shots of haircutting techniques, coloring techniques, and towards the bottom of the footage, we also have a few interviews from the owners of the salon that we're going to cut and splice and put a story together in the near future. Again, they're not inside of our computer yet, but that's why we're in this window, so we can get them onto our system and begin working with them. Now, in the second folder down here, we have a Redcam footage folder, and this folder contains exactly what it says, Redcam footage, extreme high quality 4K resolution footage. These shots may or may not be useful for this production, but we're going to go ahead and go over how we can import some of these clips so we can get them into our project and blend them in with the salon footage. And you'll notice that as we go through these clips, we see a yellow screen pop up as we scroll over them. Again, that's because these files are so massive that your computer really has to process what's going on in them. Now, if you look closely, you'll also see that each file is only between 4 and 20 seconds. We can see that down here in the time code. And over to the right, we see a number next to the letters MB, and that's telling us how big this file really is. So for a 4-second clip, we're looking at somewhere close to almost 200 megabytes. Both the flower shot and this shot of the snow on the mountain are both half a gig, 500 megabytes. That's pretty big. So for the sake of not destroying or taking over our resources on our computer, we need to go about ingesting this footage in the proper way. Now, as I skim through here, I do want to show you that we can zoom in a little closer to this footage just by using this little slider down below, and it pulls the footage into view a little bit better, and we can really see in detail what's going on with these clips. So let's go back to our EOS Digital folder one more time, and let's check out the files again so we can get a really good feel on what's going on here. So again, this shot is of the salon and the hairstylist, and she is cutting a woman's hair. And if we scroll down a little more, we run into our interviews. So this is the first interview, and it's from the CEO of the company, and her name is Susan. I know that because, well, I've seen this footage before, but you don't know that. And so as we move through our project, I'm going to show you first how we can pull that sort of information from the files, and then how to log that information so that any other editor or anyone else on the team that needs to work on this footage can have that same information. So I'm going to pull back a bit, and here we also see that we have two other interviews. As we move down, we do see this one file that's not exactly a video file, but an audio file. And if I play this real quick, we can get a feel of what this is exactly.
Camera A is up. Training and not lose their confidence. And
this is basically an audio file of one of our interviews up here. And judging by the voice, it's probably one of these two men right here. We'll talk more about how we'll put these together because they were shot separately so we can make the best interview footage possible. Now that you understand exactly what our footage contains, a typical amateur move would be to move on and just click the ingest button. But in a professional environment, and specifically on the one you and I are working on together, we want to follow a professional workflow. And if you learn this now, I promise you that you're going to thank yourself in the future when you're working on any production because you'll be avoiding a bunch of headaches when it comes to having a ton of footage. So the first way to avoid a million headaches in the future is by taking this footage. We'll briefly skim through some of the clips, and we're going to set initial in and out points so that we don't ingest everything in the world on this card. We only want to ingest particular parts that we know we'll use, or parts that may make the edit a little more interesting down the road. So what we'll do is we'll click on any one of these files in here, we'll hit play, and as the video plays, I'm just going to tap the I key on my keyboard. And when I do that, this blue line cuts right at the point where I hit the I key, I for in. And if we just rewind, we'll keep playing, and the shot looks pretty clean as is, so I'll just take my mouse and I can move it all the way to the end here. Now keep in mind when you're doing this sort of in and out cutting, when you're ingesting, it's incredibly important to remember to leave a little bit of room at the beginning and the end of the shot. These are called handles, and ultimately they help the editor have a little bit of space and a little bit of wiggle room if they need to start a little earlier or a little later on the shot. Let's move on to the next clip here. Notice how I have this shot already set up and cut. The in point is set right over here on the left, and the out point is on the right. And I set these on the in and out because the handles on the left, the little black portion in the front, and at the end, were pretty much useless. And we don't want to have all of that footage come in if we already know we're not going to use those points in the video. So rather than give the editor a headache, I've just taken the in point and the out point and set them to the most appropriate spots in this clip. Now I've set the in and out point, but I haven't yet told Prelude to import this when we do the ingestion process. In order to do that, I have to click on this little checkbox right here on the right. And when I click, we'll see it light up in white, and we'll also see a little checkbox right inside of the box. We can move over to our next clip and also check this one. And of course, we'll check the one we did a little earlier. And scroll down here a bit, and let's take a look at this clip here. So in the first second or so, we've cut it out. We hit the I for in. And I know it's shaky in there, but we'll go ahead and leave it just so the editor can make his final point. We'll give this clip a little check. Now let's scroll down to the next one. And okay, so wow, that is terrifying. That is a terrifying, I don't know about you, but that kind of frightens me. So we're going to skip over it. And just so you know, there will be moments like this when you have a clip that's just absolutely worthless. Maybe the videographer forgot to turn the camera off, or maybe it's just a shot that really doesn't work for what you're trying to do. So we'll go ahead and skip over it just by simply not checking the checkbox. On our next clip, we can skim through. Kind of shaky in the intro, so we can cut that out just by hitting the I key. And looking pretty good. We'll go ahead and cut the out right. Let's just fast forward a little bit here. That's about right. Great. We'll give it a check. And I'll just speed through here as well and set the ins and outs because I think you get the point. The main lesson here is that we're shrinking down the project's overall size, and we're making it easier for the edits and the cuts to happen because we've taken out all the clutter. Now, as for these clips, these are the interviews that we talked about a little earlier, and for the sake of not cutting out something that's incredibly important, I always advise to just keep the entire interview, no matter how many takes or how many video clips that entails. Always ingest them with your footage. The last thing you want is to accidentally forget to ingest or reject a clip on accident, and then you don't have that interview file. So just a good rule of thumb, always make sure to check and ingest the interview files. And I may or may not be telling you this from personal experience of accidentally deleting an incredibly important interview. But I digress. Let's go ahead and move on by pulling out here in our ingest window just to see the magical work we've done. As you can see, every single clip is now selected, except for our horrendous, scary doll right here in the corner. And we know again that it's not selected because there's no checkbox. And I'm just going to zoom in real quick and yeah, we're not bringing that in. We're going to leave that out. All right, so zooming back out, and before you think, all right, John, let's go ahead and hit that blue ingest button in the right corner, I want you to slow down for a second because there's an even more crucial step that we need to take, and that is the actual transfer settings that we need to set right now. So let's do it. The transfer option inside of this ingest window is incredibly important because it allows us to do two things. First, it lets us tell Prelude exactly where we'd like to put all of these clips. And secondly, it allows us to save an archive version of all of this footage, so if anything were to ever happen to our hard drive, we could always restore this project with those raw files. So what we're going to do now is we're going to choose our primary destination first, and then we're going to go into how we can add an additional destination. First, we'll click on the Transfer Clips to Destination option at the top, and come down to the drop down here that says Primary Destination. Prelude will ask us where we'd like to save, and for this particular instance, we're going to save in the desktop. So we'll browse for the desktop, and on the desktop, obviously, is our project folder. So we'll give it a click, and we'll click Choose. Now, if we wanted to add an additional folder that'll store all of these files, we can add the Add Subfolder option right here. This will tell Prelude to create a brand new folder inside of that project folder so we can store all of these clips. And in my opinion, this is a really great move because all of these particular shots were shot on one camera. So for the sake of keeping everything nice and neat, it's great to have a folder for each particular camera. So we'll go ahead and select the Add Subfolder option. And right below the checkbox, we'll give this folder a new name. We're going to call this EOS Digital 1080p, just like we have on the actual card, and we're going to add footage at the end so we know what's inside this folder. This will keep everything nice and neat, so if we ever have questions of where our footage is, we'll know where it's at. Now, transcoding is a very interesting and very in-depth topic, one that goes way beyond the scope of this particular course. But just to give you the rundown here, if you choose this transcode option, you're going to tell Prelude, hey, take my footage and not only make a copy of it, but also format it into a specific type of video. And if we click down on this drop-down menu, we have all of these different codecs that Adobe can read natively. Now, I typically like to use the QuickTime option here, and the H.264 one as well. This is great for working with video files that are really large, and we want to shrink them down. So you're probably asking yourself, why would I use this transcode option? And the answer is pretty simple. If you want to work with really large files inside of Prelude or Adobe Premiere, but you have a slower computer that can't read them natively, using the transcode option will speed up the workflow so you can work with something called proxies, which are basically smaller versions of your video files. This will allow you to edit a lot faster, your system will work a lot smoother, and you won't have to worry about rendering as much because it'll all be transcoded from the start. So that's what this option is for. Now, for the sake of our project, I'm going to go ahead and choose the QuickTime option. Now, again, I'm doing this because I want to make a copy of the footage and I want to format it or transcode it into a native file resolution for my computer. That way, when we play the video files back, it'll play a lot smoother. Now, for the preset option, this can get really, really deep into resolutions and frame rates and bit rates. So rather than really making your head explode here, I'm just going to tell you that the safest option when you're using this is the match source rewrap option. Now, that doesn't work for every single workflow, but in the case of our project, here's what we're trying to do. We're trying to take this footage from the camera into our computer, we're ingesting it, and we are formatting it as QuickTime so it runs quickly on our computer. We just want to bring it into a native format. So for the preset option, we don't necessarily want to guess here. And I'll just go ahead and give you a spoiler alert. Our footage was shot at 23.97 frames per second. And if that doesn't mean anything to you, that's okay. But for those who understand what that means, if we were to choose one of these options here, such as 24 or 25, we would really screw up our footage, and then we'd have all sorts of issues down the road. So instead of sabotaging your project from the start, I highly recommend just to go with the match source option up top. And for the sake of our project, that's what we're going to be doing here. So we'll keep that at match source. Now for the stitch clips together option, this will basically take all of our files that we see and have checked over here on the left and put them together into one massive long video clip. That can work in some instances, such as trying to create a time lapse or just putting together a remix video of everything that was on your camera. But in this particular instance, we're not going to choose this option. So we'll leave it blank. Now for the verify option, this is basically Prelude's way of verifying that the footage is properly imported into our project and all of the files are copied from the card to our hard drive. And at the time of this recording, this verify option actually isn't even usable if it's on an SD card. So we're not even going to worry about it, but now you know what it is. And it's not really necessary either way. All right, so everything is now set up for our primary transfer. And at this point, we can either choose to move on to the metadata, or we can be smart and add an additional destination for this footage. And guess what? I highly advise you to do this, because this is the part where we bulletproof our project. We do that by archiving the footage into a separate hard drive, a separate destination that will make sure that we never lose this footage for as long as we need it. So I'll just give this add destination button a click, and this will let us create an additional destination. And if you notice on the left here, inside of my Finder window, I have a handy dandy archive drive already plugged into my system. So I'll go ahead and give it a click. It's empty for the time being, so I'm just going to go ahead and hit choose and select that as our archive drive. For the add subfolder, we'll change the name back to what we did on the top, which was EOS Digital 1080p footage. So we'll just copy and paste that name in here as well, but I'm also going to add in the name backup, just so I know what this is. Now, you might think that we should probably put all the settings exactly the same as we did up here in the primary destination for our backup, but that would actually be false. And the reason why is since we're not going to be working with these files right now, we're just backing them up, it's probably best that we actually import the physical raw file that came from the camera. So instead of choosing this transcode option, we're actually not going to use it. We're going to keep it blank. That way, when Prelude gets to this destination or this hard drive and has to make a copy of these files, it'll do so without actually transcoding them. And this is, again, good for two reasons. One, because we have the massive original file at our disposal if we ever needed to reconnect it. And two, because we don't have to transcode this a second time, it'll take Prelude a lot less time to transfer the files. So you're saving time and you're saving your butt. Now that we're all set up, let's just review our settings here. We've set up our transfer to our desktop inside of the Premiere Project folder. We're adding a subfolder, which is EOS Digital 1080p footage. We're transcoding it QuickTime, and we're going to match the source or rewrap it so that it comes in natively as QuickTime. And we added a second destination, which is the archive drive, in order to back up our files. And for the record, we are not transcoding them because it'll save time and because it'll keep the original files for later. A little caveat as we move forward here. You're probably thinking to yourself, that's great, John. We've got all the 1080p stuff, but what about that Redcam footage? Well, let me show you something a little unfortunate about this workflow. Let's go over to the folder on the left, the Redcam 4K folder, that's on our SD card. And for the sake of our demo, we'll just choose the first three, since I don't really see us using this fourth one here. Also, it's a really big file, as we can see here on the right. So we'll go back to our EOS Digital now that we've selected the Redcam, and wait a minute. Oh no. We've unchecked all of our video files. Why is that? Well, here's the deal. Unfortunately, Prelude prefers to process folders one at a time, which means that if we leave the folder that we're working in to set the in points and out points and check the ones we want, we're going to lose a bit of information when we come back. Now notice on the right how everything stayed intact, thankfully. Our transfer options are where we're transferring it to, the subfolder name, the format, all of that is the same. Unfortunately, they were all unchecked. Now, this isn't a problem since we both know that the only one we didn't check was that scary doll right here in the center. But if this were 100 or 200 clips or a massive, massive shoot that we needed very specific clips for, that would be a real big headache. So as a general tip, when you're processing a folder through this Prelude ingest window, make sure you choose all of the ones all at once, and then you go ahead and move forward with the ingestion process. And I do this to demonstrate how there are flaws in the workflow that we have here and how you can overcome them later on. And just so you're aware, I put them in separate folders here so we could see the difference between cameras and how we're going to process them. So let's go ahead and do this. We're going to come back in here, and I'm going to select all of our files, and I'm going to leave out the scary doll in the center, and we're going to move on with our metadata. Okay, so we're one step closer to the ingest button. But before we get there, we have to talk about metadata. I know, it's a lot more boring than it actually sounds, but I'll try to make this as fun as possible, so bear with me here. So first of all, what is metadata? Well, it's basically a really tiny little file that has all of the information that anyone needs to know about this video clip, or any video clip that we're about to ingest. So for example, I prefer to think of metadata as the tags or the little keywords that we have for our video clips. And by doing this now, and by tagging or metadata filing all of our clips now, we can easily access any of the ones we're looking for later on. So let's go ahead and take care of it so we don't have to worry about it later. We'll start by clicking on the Add File Metadata. And what we're going to do is we're going to actually create a quick little template so that we don't have to do this ever again, or at least not for this project. Here's how it's done. We'll give this little twirl down over here on the right a click, and we're going to set up a new preset. And by the way, if you wanted to import any existing presets, we can do that right here. Now, this is especially great if you're working with raw files like RECam files or Red R3D files. Those types of cameras have a lot of metadata that either come natively on the camera or we need to import them manually. For the sake of this particular shoot and this particular camera, we're not going to worry about that. Let's just stick with the new presets, shall we? Okay, so we have ourselves a new preset. We're going to click this little plus button here, and this is going to open up a metadata field. So the way this works is every time we push that plus button, we get two dialog boxes that we can change. The first one, the top box, is called an input metadata key, and that's just a fancy word for name. So we're going to give a name to this metadata key, and we're going to call it, let's say we called it the camera. And so what I'm effectively doing here is I'm listing what camera we used for this particular shoot. And for this particular shoot, with all of these clips, we used the EOS Canon 7D. And now that is officially the meta value for the name of this data file, which is the Canon 7D. Now let's add a second field. Now typically we want to add things like the location, the shot take, perhaps we did multiple takes, or even the scene if we're shooting a short film or a massive project that has multiple scenes that we need to shoot. That's where this really comes in handy. For the sake of this demo, we're going to go ahead and do interior, exterior. And this is going to tell us in the future where these were shot. Were they shot inside or were they shot outside? And as we skim through all this footage, it looks like all of this was shot inside. So we'll type in INT for interior. So what we've effectively done in one fell swoop is we've tagged all of these clips with the name of the camera and where it was shot, inside or outside, interior or exterior. Nice job. Now let's go ahead and add one more field for this metadata file, and we're going to call it shot. Like what kind of shot? So shot type would probably work best. Now, because all of these files might be a little bit different, for instance, the ones at the bottom were interview shots, and the ones closer to the top are more like cutaways, we don't necessarily have to fill this out right now. We can always come back to it later and add more information to the metadata file, which is always a great thing. So we'll go ahead and leave it blank for now, but we do want to add it inside this field so we can access it later. Okay, now since we're done with this metadata file, we need to save it. So what we can do is over here on the right, we have the ability to save this as a new preset, and then we can use it later on down the road when we work on another project. Not a bad option, huh? But there's one little problem, and let me just show you so you don't make this mistake. When I hit save, we suddenly see this error. And if you're not sure what this invalid character means, it can be really frustrating. So let me go ahead and reduce your stress right now by showing you the issue. You see how interior underscore exterior was written? I did this on purpose because that's exactly how metadata needs to be written out. There can't be any blank spaces inside of the name of the field. But if we come down to shot type, I screwed up because I left a space between the word shot and type. So to fix this, we'll give it a click and we'll put an underscore underneath that word instead of a space. And once we do that, we can come back to our save option, and now we can successfully save this preset with a predetermined name. And we'll just call this Prelude Meta. Sound good? Cool. We hit OK, and now in the future, if we ever need to use this meta file for other projects, we can always call upon it by going to this scroll down right here, and we'll always see that option on our system. Now this option right here allows us to choose where the metadata will be saved. Should we save it on only the desktop footage, or should we also include it on the archive footage that won't be transcoded? And that's really up to you. My personal preference, I actually like doing it on all destinations so that those meta files can be saved everywhere. And if anything ever happened to one copy, we could always pull from the other copy, like the archive version, and those meta files will still be there. But today, just to be a contrarian and just to be a little different, we're going to choose apply to primary destination only instead. All right, so the final step in our ingestion process is the rename file option. File renaming can be really, really helpful, and I really need to stress how important this is to you by showing you a really cool trick to automate the whole process. You ready? Let's get into it. Now, before we get started renaming our files, I'm going to close out these options down here because they're just way too many. And let's take a look at what we can do here to automate the process of renaming files. First off, why are we renaming files? Well, let's click on the little icon down at the bottom to see our list view. This will show us all of the clips inside of the folder, and we notice that all of their names are completely random. I mean, maybe they were shot on different days, maybe they were shot on different 7D cameras. Either way, we need to fix this. So we can do this by using this rename files option, and it's going to save us some headache, and it's also going to organize the project for us automatically. Let me show you how it's done. We'll go ahead and start by clicking over here on the new preset option. And once again, we have a little plus button, but this time we have a list of different options that we can choose from. Now, this is where things get a little fun. What we're going to do is we're going to create a template for naming our files as they come into the ingestion process. And we can basically choose any option in here or a mixture of them so we can really get down to the nitty-gritty of naming our files. So I'm going to choose custom text in here, and I'm just going to type in salon underscore footage. And as we create this naming structure, we'll see a sample version of it right above the dialog box. And this is basically showing us what it'll look like when we're done. So now let's add an additional parameter here. I'm going to come into the plus again, and we're going to add, we could add date if we wanted to. And let me go ahead and stop right now and just tell you the difference between these two, because people tend to get this confused all the time. The creation date is the date that the shot was taken, the date that the footage was shot. But keep in mind that some people don't actually set their camera properly. So if you choose this creation date, make sure that the creation date is correct. Okay, and you can check with your videographer if you have one, or if you shot it yourself, just check your camera to make sure it's set appropriately. The ingestion option is basically the date of today, the date that you are ingesting the footage into this project. Now, I'm pointing this out to you because I've seen a lot of errors happen in the industry, all because somebody chose the wrong date. So for the sake of your sanity, as well as mine, especially since we're working together, I'm going to leave this date out altogether. Only because for this particular project, it's just one client, it's just one shoot date, so we can go ahead and delete it by clicking on the little trash can over here on the right. Okay, so let's choose a different option. How about custom auto increment? What the heck does that mean? Well, basically, it's putting a number at the end of our footage. And if we look up here on the sample, we'll see that that number starts at 1. And this is incredibly important to have. If we don't put a number at the end of our clips, when Prelude begins to import this footage or ingest it, it's going to overwrite itself over and over again, and ultimately we'll be left with one clip, which is going to be the last clip that it imports. So rather than overwriting every single clip, let's go ahead and put a number at the end, and this makes the process of ingestion possible. But let's go one step further and actually add an additional 0 to the beginning of the footage, so that way they fall in order. So for this particular project, we have roughly 15 to 20 clips that we're going to be ingesting. So I'm going to go ahead and choose the 01. But just as a pro tip, sometimes projects can be as big as 2, 3, 500 clips. And in that case, I would highly suggest using the 3 digits. All right, so salon_footage 01, looking good. Let's add one more option, and this is one that I highly advise you to use just because it keeps things very, very organized, and that is to use the original file name inside of your naming structure. So if all else failed, you would at least have that file name at the very end. So let's take a look at the final sample. Salon_footage 01 file name. That's okay, but that could be better. One way we could make it better is by putting the number in front of the name. So now it's 01 salon_footage file name. But that's still not good enough because that just looks like one massive long word. So here's a pro tip I want to give you, and one that I use all the time. I'm going to add one more custom text, and this is going to just be a simple dash. Now I can use the move up option right here, the little arrow, give it a click, and notice when I click on it, it moves that field between the word footage and file. And let's move it one more up, so that way it's in front of the word salon. Now we have 01 salon_footage file name. Still looks like a run-on word, so we'll add one more custom text, we'll make it another dash, and we'll put it in between file name and salon footage, and thus we have a pretty clean looking sample name. I like it. Okay, so the name looks good. We are good to go, and we're definitely going to save this preset so we can come back to it later on down the road. So we'll do that by clicking on the little save button here in the bottom right corner. So I'm going to name it digit-salon footage-file name, and this will tell me that there's going to be 2 digits in the beginning, and there's going to be a name in the center, and then the actual file name at the end. And to save it, we'll go ahead and click on the OK button. Now, if we look in this drop-down option at the top, right above the sample, we now have our preset in here for good. And if we ever need it, we can always come back to it. So, now that we've gone through that entire process, the transfer, the file metadata, the file renaming, and setting up our presets, it is now time to ingest our footage. Are you ready? And now, for the moment we've both been waiting for, let's go ahead and ingest this footage into Prelude. So when we hit the ingest button, the ingestion window will disappear, and now 2 things are happening. One, a program called Adobe Media Encoder opens up in the background. This is the program that will be silently transferring our footage for us. If it needs to be transcoded, that's the software that's going to do it for us. And in the bottom left, we see that ingestion process happening in real time. Now, depending on the file size, this can take a little bit of time, and we can see inside of our Prelude project that all of a sudden the footage is beginning to populate as the clips are being transferred. And if I right-click on any one of these clips inside and go to Reveal in Finder, it's going to show me exactly where it placed those files. And just like we had it set up, it's created a copy of those files into our project folder that's on our desktop. And it put it into its own little subfolder called EOS Digital Footage 1080p. Pretty great, right? But wait, it gets better, because remember that we also added an additional destination for Prelude to save all of these files. So if we go over to our archive drive, boom, there we are, a new folder called EOS Digital 1080p, and this footage is the backup file. This is where we have all of the original files from our initial footage card. And these will be our safety net in case anything ever happens to our actual project. So congratulations to you, you've successfully completed the ingestion process. But that's just where the work starts. If we go back to Prelude, we'll see a brand new window called the Events window. This basically tells us the status of any process that we activated. So in the case of our rendering, it tells us that everything worked out fine. And if we had any sort of errors, we would see a little red icon right here under the type column. But because they're all blue, looks like we're good to go. But before you get too excited, keep in mind that we have not imported our Redcam footage yet. And since 4K is on the rise and slowly becoming the new standard for video, let's talk about how we can do this. And by learning it now, you'll be future-proofing your editing skills. So let's talk about it. Now, a quick disclaimer before we get into importing, and if you're using the demo footage inside of this project, you want to make sure that your computer has the Red Cine X Pro plugin. This is basically a free download from the Red website, and if you follow the link inside of the resources on this project, you can easily get this downloaded onto your computer so that you can read Redcam files. There's a version for Windows as well as Mac. Simply go to the website and download it before you begin working with Red footage. All right, so our final mission inside of our Prelude project is to import our Redcam footage. And like I said before, this can be very daunting and confusing, but now that you know a few things about ingesting and how transcoding works, this shouldn't be too hard. So let's go ahead and walk through the process. I'm going to go ahead and click on the Ingest button, and this will pull up the Ingest window. We'll choose the location by clicking on the drop down here, and we're going to choose our desktop folder that we created earlier. And for the subfolder, we're going to create a new folder just like we did before, and we'll call it R3D Redcam 4K. Transcode. This is where things get a little bit tricky. Because these files are so big, we want to use the most optimal format. Now, everyone has their own opinion on which one's better, which one works faster, and you're entitled to your own opinion as well. I will tell you that the format that's worked best for me on a Mac is the H.264 format because it compresses really well. And although it's a much smaller file, it doesn't look as degraded as it would if we use some other options. So again, everyone has their preference. I prefer H.264 because it's been wonderful to work with. But the real trick is to get the preset correct. So before we choose the proper preset, we need to know a few things about our footage. And for this Redcam footage, the resolution was shot in 4K, and it was also captured at 23.976 frames per second. What is important is that we choose the appropriate file preset that matches those numbers. The proper setting for this is to come down and choose one that has 23.976 option. If we don't do this, then what may occur when we're editing later on down the road is the footage may look more sped up than normal, or it might look slower than normal, depending on the frame rate of our timeline. So when your workflow, when you're doing and working with Redcam footage, you definitely want to make sure that you have the right frame rate and the right resolution. This will allow us to match this footage that we use with our other footage that we ingested a little bit earlier. Okay, if you understand that, then you've pretty much got this down pat. So congratulations if you understand what just was said. If not, don't worry, it can be very complicated at first, but you'll get the hang of it, I promise. So again, we don't want to stitch these clips together because we're not making a big montage, and we're not going to be verifying our footage because unfortunately we can't verify on this particular SD card. But something we do want to do is add an additional destination so we can archive this red footage in its native format, which is ultra high definition, 4K, not HD. So to do this, we click on the Add Destination button. We'll choose the archive drive and add a subfolder, And again, the file structure should be the same, so we'll call it R3D, Redcam 4K, just like before. And here's the trick. Do not select the transcode option. Again, the reason is because we want to archive this footage in its native format, in its original, raw, uncompressed format, so we can access it later in case anything bad ever happens. We don't need another destination, but if we wanted, we could add a third, a fourth, and even a fifth. I'm going to close this window now, and let's go down to File Metadata. Now, this is where things get a little easier. Because we already created a preset for our file metadata, all we have to do is tick the box here. And this time, we're going to apply to all destinations. So when we apply this meta file, it'll go to all places on our archive drive and our hard drive. And we'll just come down to the next drop-down menu, and we're going to choose the Prelude meta option. This automatically loads up the previous meta file that we created. And notice how we have camera, interior, exterior, and shot type all already pre-filled out. In fact, it even has the camera from before, EOS Canon 7D, interior, and the shot type, which is empty. So here is where we'll make the changes. We'll go ahead and type in the camera field, Redcam. We'll come down to the interior exterior option. And since all of these clips look like they were shot outside, we'll go ahead and type in EXT because they're exterior. And for shot type, well, these are technically called B-roll shots. B-roll is basically a cutaway. It's a shot that we put in between somebody speaking and transitioning to another environment or another scene. So we'll type in B-roll, and that's it for the Prelude meta. So we'll go ahead and close our meta file. And now, finally, for the file rename, we'll give the checkbox a click. Again, we'll apply to all destinations, and this time we'll choose our salon footage template, and we'll do a little tweaking here too. Now, this is important. We want to change the file number on these guys, the Redcam footage, to the preceding number from our previous footage. This isn't necessary 100%, but in order to keep things in consistent order, I really prefer to continue with the next number in line. So for example, our previous footage, the Canon 1080p footage, had 12 clips in it, which means that when we import this Redcam footage, we'll want to start at the number 13 instead of 1. So over here in the custom incremental number, we can go ahead and change this number from 1 to 13. And if we look at the sample right above the number 13, we see that this is what the first file will be named. This is what it'll look like. Okay, now our last step is to actually select the clips because we haven't done that yet. So we'll go ahead and check all, and that will let us import all 4 of these clips. And once again, we're taken back to the logging screen where we see the ingest progress bar on the bottom left. So that's it. Congratulations, you officially ingested our project files here. And we are now seeing as they come in, every single file. And as it plays back, it's going to play back in the H.264 format instead of that massive Redcam R3D file format. So in a nutshell, that is how you ingest footage. That is how you transcode, transfer, and archive footage, all using Prelude. Now let's move on to our next lesson where we talk about diving into our footage head first so we can add subclips, comments, and make the job and process of editing a lot easier.